Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled The Beauty of Good Design and its Effect on Sustainability. This event is presented by What is Design in collaboration with the ongoing National Vending Gallery exhibition and the Design Singapore Council. The event is also supported by the National Design Centre and is part of the National Design Centre's Sustainability and Design Program lineup for January 2021. I am Sui from What is Design, and we are a collective of design students trying to share more about the value of design in today's context from a student's perspective. Our aim is also to encourage Singaporeans to participate in the local design scene. I will be your MC and moderator for today. Before we proceed with the presentation, I would like to highlight a few key housekeeping matters. Please be informed that this webinar will be recorded. During the webinar, your audio will also be on mute. However, we welcome questions throughout the session. Please keep your questions coming in through the Zoom Q&A function. When posting a question, please do identify yourself and indicate if you'd like a specific panelist to address your question. Should you encounter any technical issues, please reach out to our technical team through the Zoom chat function. Our program today will be as such. We will be starting with a segment with Dr. Christian before moving on to another segment with Mr. Hans. If you have any question during the webinar about either segments, do send them in using the Zoom Q&A function and we'll have a discussion about them at the very end. Just a quick introduction of our speakers before we start. Dr. Christian and Mr. Hans are here with us today. Dr. Christian is a designer and educator, and during this webinar, he will be introducing a rational analytical approach based on 3 interrelated dimensions, namely synthetic, pragmatic, and semantic. Mr. Hans Tan is also a designer and educator, and he'll be sharing more about the collection of items put together for topic number 2 of the National Vending Gallery, which is based on his hunt for archaic household goods shops around Singapore over the years. Now, without any more delays, let's welcome Dr. Christian, please.
Thank you for this nice introduction. Today I'm going to talk about the syntactic, pragmatic, and semantic dimension. This specific methodology in design has been presented in my book, Design for a Contemporary World, a few years ago. I start by a quotation from Johannes Itten, who was one of the major lecturer at the Bauhaus in 1920s. Respect of the individual is the beginning and the end of all education, because we are dealing with design and we are also developing the personality and the individuality of each of our students. So today I'm going to talk about the descriptive dimension, syntactic, pragmatic, and semantic. So what is the benefit of syntactic, pragmatic, and semantic analysis? What we call SPS is a way of saying good design leads to very sustainable design decision. It is a holistic way of considering design. But SPS, first of all, enhance structure and sharpen the sense of observation from 3 respective angles. We send our students downtown everywhere, and they observe the environment. This methodology can be applied to entire environment, from a simple object to the most complete design. We can analyze a simple jewelry design, but also some building or some very complex engineering product. This methodology could be extended to service design. Each dimension I'm going to present later does not exist individually, but are interrelated. This is very important. So it's a kind of a trilogy. And this SPS could be driven from fundamental level to the most complex professional levels. It's the fact that we are developing this sense of this observation, allow and highlight the advantage and disadvantage of the respective product or project. And naturally, it opens some design opportunity. And we will see later that it can be used also, it could be used also as a rational tool of communication. So it's a method of analysis, but it's also a method of communication. So let's move to the syntactic dimension. I'm going to introduce each dimension, and after I will show some, of course, some key examples. So syntactic dimension refers to a scientific analysis of the physical characteristic of each component of product or project. We take in consideration structure, but also materials, the process of fabrication, process of construction, and the functional relationship between the different components of a product or architecture project. In one way, it's a very scientific, it's a very rational, very engineering approach. So there is, this is one of the characteristics of this approach. Specifically, we present this analysis with some explored perspective, dimensional technical drawing. We try to identify the materials and their characteristic, system of assembly of the component in a product or architectural project. We take also in considerations some estimated manufacture process, the cost of product or project are also very important. And naturally, we highlight the advantage and disadvantage from the syntactic point of view of the respective product or building. I'm going to show here a few examples. So here we have a kind of a button to open a drawer, storage at the entrance of one HDB. And here, this is a very, very fundamental study done by one group of one-year students. And they, first of all, identify the system, the mechanism with this perspective, and the material, the dimension. They also highlight some advantage and disadvantage of the respective product from a syntactic point of view. But of course, this is a very, very basic level. Another example here is stick to play game. We have here some exposed perspective showing all the components on the left side. We have some front and top view, and also some identification of the advantage. Here, the student highlight the fact that the components are individually replaceable, but in terms of disadvantage, they highlight also that the fact that the exposed metal shaft rust easily. It can be easy vandalized since the components are easy taken apart. Pragmatic dimension, which is something very important. The pragmatic dimension refers to rational analysis, how a product works and how it is to be used. It's include, first of all, a study of the use of the function, user interface, and what we call anthropometric. So it's necessary to give a definition, is a comparative study of the size and proportion of the human body, if we go very deep. And of course, the ergonomic. We try to design to minimize physical effort and discomfort and hence maximize efficiency. We take also in consideration in this pragmatic dimension, the maintenance consideration. If the product is very, very well designed and we have to clean it every day, the maintenance will be easy. So this is something because it's a direct interaction with the human being. We need to provide photo, drawing, ergonomic position and sequences. We zoom on specific ergonomic position to highlight the problem. We try also, if the case we are designing or we observe one object completely knocked down, that means CKD, we explain the process of assembly of the product. And this can, it's a perfect example is an IKEA product, for instance, which are presented this way. And of course, we highlight the advantage and disadvantage from a pragmatic point of view. So let's take a look at some example. Okay, this little button I've already highlighted. Here, the student took some photo of the different sequences when we open this specific button. We highlight also the fact that the student highlight that the very sharp angle of the respective button could hurt your finger. So this is one of the element that could be improved for future design, for instance. Another analysis of the stick here, and the students show how we use this little stick. It's very intuitive. There is many ways of holding because it's circular, etc., etc. They highlight a certain number of issues here. For instance, when you use for a long time, this emotion tiring to all after extended use, slipper when hand gets sweaty, too small for large hand. risk of wrist injury of back, shoulder, stiffness if only wrist is used. Friction between side of hand and control platform. So from that, in the future design, the student is going to take those issues in consideration and we try to find some solution. So the observation and the identification of the disadvantage of a product in one way is a motor of creativity. Semantic dimension, I think that this is maybe one of the key dimensions of of this trilogy. Usually, I believe that the designer make the break not so much in terms of syntactic and of pragmatic, but mainly in terms of semantic. If I look at the top design piece of furniture since now 50 years, it's more at the level of the language that the design, the break has been done. So the semantic dimension in design context refers to an analysis of those three main components. First, the context is which the product is supposed to be used. Context is a very broad. For instance, it could be if I'm designing a handle for McDonald's, if I'm or for the Hyatt or very prestigious hotel, the context would be radically different. It can be a cultural context, it can be industrial context, etc., etc. It's all those elements related to the context, but at the whole level. The form we take in consideration in this analysis, the form analogy, which in effect is a comparison between the product and other objects that have similar form or shape features, and which are often used to explain a principle of concept. And maybe the most important one, the spirit or emotional response evoked by the product in general. So we present specifically photo and drawing illustrating the above component, but also we ask the student to select some very sharp keyword to qualify each photo or drawing. So let's see some example here. So here, for instance, this button is located at the entrance of some HDB or some office. This is for the context. In terms of form analogy, some students have seen some analogy with some switch or some solar panel, some staircase. And in terms of spirit, the keyword who came to their mind is unobtrusive because there is no, it's completely flash, impenetrable, and it's secure. So naturally, the advantage is the student identify the fact that it gives to the user a sense of security. I'm not going to read everything, but there is some camouflage appearance help limit pool of user to intent view. But in terms of disadvantage, this very cold appearance, it's might be not so good for them. So they believe that we cannot fit this kind of button to some other context such Art Deco, tropical, or Oriental. Let's see some of this comment. This is a nice presentation of this stick, and the context is of course the arcade where the teenagers are playing some carnival. The people who are using the target user are definitely the young generation. In terms of analogy, there is something very fun, some analogy with the bulbous, edible, quaint, spherical. And in terms of spirit, they have the feeling that it's related to the speed, the action, and also the rotation. It seems that in terms of advantage, it complement very well the environment, and it's simple and dynamic. But in terms of disadvantage, the student think that this design, this circular design compromise to something will look effectively, or obviously very fun, compromise the ergonomy. In the introduction, I mentioned that the syntactic, pragmatic, and semantic analysis could be also a rational tool of communication. And at the end of the exercise of some button or handle, my student naturally have presented their project using the same approach. We have a project here from my former student, Olivia Lee, who is currently teaching in NUS. She has designed this tape. She has done some investigation. I think she visited different shop to understand all the mechanism of a tape, and she tried to see how this mechanism could be incorporated in her system. One of the characteristics of this button is the fact that the action of the button, of the handle of the tape, is from the front part, the place where the water come from. So she have done also some pragmatic analysis, and she tried to show clearly to explain how the user is manipulating the tape, how we close it by rotating it, and how we can use eventually some alternative approach. So this syntactic pragmatic analysis is a fantastic tool to communicate an idea for a competition, for instance, or to communicate with your client, or also to communicate with some technician or with some engineer to explain how the product is designed in a very rational way. Semantic analysis, the context of this tape is obviously a quite exclusive restaurant and bathroom and toilet. In terms of form analogy, she established a parallel with some ballerina, this representation of Pinocchio and some kind of craft with using wood. In terms of spirit, she finds some fun with this some analogy here with this person. The key words are very interesting here: whimsical, simple, spring, and longing. Let's move to another example. Tan Sishu, who is also teaching in NUS, has designed this hanger who look like almost like a boomerang, quite original. This is a year one project. Just a quick, simple syntactic analysis where she present quickly the section of this hanger, which is at the contrary of the conventional hanger, very curvy, very generous in wood, quite exclusive. Can be used in you can made in a plywood, silicone, or polyurethane. The prototype here has been made in wood. In terms of ergonomy, she has done some very nice drawing explaining how we can grab it from different parts, but also how we can bring few pieces together, and how the shape is directly related to the shape of the shoulder, which receive naturally the shirt. In terms of context, it's of course mainly for some quite exclusive boutique or wardrobe. She finds some analogy in terms of form with a spider or with the letter Y of this foot. And in terms of spirit, she found that the elasticity, this kind of this drop of a color is expressing this fluidity of her product. Okay, so this is just a few examples how this methodology can help to understand the product, identify the different components, the ergonomy of one existing product, the semantic, but also how this methodology can help us to communicate our own design. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christian. That was a very insightful sharing about the different ways we can analyze design. If there are any questions, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A function, and we'll address as many of these questions as we can at the end of the entire session. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Hans Tan.
So for today, I'd like to share, about the sustainability of design, but using the framework that Dr. Christian has mentioned earlier, the pragmatic, semantic, and synthetic analysis. Even for myself, I do use this framework as a pedagogical framework to teach design, and for this framework, it's really useful to appreciate not just good design, but also how design can be sustainable in a different way. So normally when we talk about sustainability, we often focus on the synthetic part of the product, meaning, using materials that is ecologically friendly, using production processes that's responsible, and synthetic also refers, to the type of technology that is appropriate, to be used in a product. But at the same time, it's also interesting to to think about sustainability in a pragmatic point of view, because certainly performance and usability does affect sustainability. And for example, if a product is really usable, is really comfortable, one would expect a person or customer or user to use it far longer than a product that spoils easily or gets uncomfortable really quickly. So the other thing is, in the semantic point of view, we often see, I might see semantic as the idea of form and also meaning. Form being, the shape and what's communicated through the shape and the form of the product. But at the same time, meaning is what we construct, the meaning we construct when we see the product or the shape or the details of the product. And this is very important. If we push it to the extreme, we could see, for example, the meaning that we have constructed for family heirlooms that we keep for a long period of time. It's a very interesting perspective of how we could make products last a lot longer if we are able to create more connections, more meaningful connections with our products. So I think the interesting thing about this analysis, the SPS analysis, is that, if you can see on my slides here, is expressed as a Venn diagram. So at the same time, I wanted to show, that the overlaps here actually mean something. It matters as well. And in this case, as you can see here, if one does not overlap the different segments, you might see the diagram as something like that, more like a segmented diagram. And I would say that, for a design that is segmented like that, is a poorly considered design. And I'll give you an example. So for example, if the company would be designing a product, maybe in this case, the one person in the company, maybe the marketing manager determines what to design, from a marketing survey. Maybe the production managers will suggest, a material or production process, to produce a product. The engineer might come up, with a particular use or utility to design for. And in this case, maybe the engineer or the designer, would design, a look for it, aesthetic to cover the whole design. And all these decisions are made separately, as demonstrated by the Venn diagram, and they do not come together thoughtfully as a whole. And maybe, if you might end up with something like that. If you're owner of a whiskey mini egg whiz, I'm sorry, but I thought this was an interesting example to show, how a design components can be decided separately, and when they come together, they might not seem to be well established as a product as a whole. And in this case, in the spirit of using examples of household kitchen tools, maybe I use a much better example. So in this case, if you look at mini whisk as a household product, one of the best rated products is the one by Kitchen Craft, the professional magic mini whisk with the soft grip. Even in this example, one might say that a lot of design decisions made here is made separately. So for example, especially in the synthetic point of view or the pragmatic point of view, there's many components being used to fulfill different functions. So if you look at this professional magic whisk, it is made up of at least 6 different components. Even just with the handle alone, there's 4 different parts, and made up of different materials. There's silicone being used, as probably a plastic core and a harder plastic cap. So these come together to fulfill the performance of the product. One might argue that this product really achieves a good level of pragmatic performance, but at the same time, just for the sake of today and for the sake of analysis, I will show you another product, a mini whisk as well, that has been honed by ages of, I will call it old wisdom, and to demonstrate to you, what if a whisk was to be designed or to made by overlapping all these different spheres in the analysis. So a good example of this certainly is the bamboo whisk, the whisk used by traditional Japanese to whisk to froth matcha. And here, if you look at the whisk and you know how it's produced, it's really beautiful, and it's essentially made of a single segment of bamboo, and with some strings tying the prongs together. And in a synthetic point of view, if you follow the slide, one might say that the choice of material is really good here as well. It's waterproof. Bamboo is waterproof naturally. It's a neutral material. It doesn't add any extra flavor to the beverage. It's a renewable material. As we know, bamboo grows really, really fast. And in this case, there's a very interesting and effective way of constructing this piece. If you have watched videos on YouTube on the construction of bamboo whisk, you will see how the craftsman is able to using this black string that you see on the bamboo whisk to tie and to separate the prongs together, right? And to separate them into the elements that are open and elements that are closed in the middle to create this flower-shaped dome like prongs of about 100 over prongs. With those prongs being really small and in a big multitude, you can actually whisk and froth very, very effectively. And it's aided by two types of prongs actually. The wider prongs where it's flexible and thin. And if you notice, the prongs inside is tied together on itself into a stiff prong. So when you whisk, these two prongs act together and to be able to enable you to whisk the tea or the beverage in this case are very, very effective, and you can create froth very, very quickly. And of course, there's other advantages if you see this just this single piece of bamboo as well. You might notice that it stands on its own. It doesn't need an extra stand. It doesn't need a hole, for it to be hung. And the natural note of the bamboo actually separates the prongs and the handle, almost as if it was intentional. And semantically, of course, one might say that when you look at this on the table, it looks really sculptural. It looks organic and natural. And of course, this has now become a very, very important cultural part of a Japanese tea ceremony contextually. So, with that, I hope this example gives you an idea of how a product can be designed very thoughtfully and very well, in a very well considered manner, with this framework of pragmatic, semantic, and synthetic coming together as overlapping segments where a designer or person designing or making a product can make it, by not considering the different factors in and of themselves, but consider them as a whole and making design decisions that solve different parts of the product at the same time. And with that, I also wanted to use this framework of analysis to reflect on some of the products that is currently being featured at the National Vending Gallery. And this gallery is currently presenting topic 2, and it presents about 24 household items. And these household items, they're rather interesting because they have been sourced from very old household goods shops in Singapore. So over the past few years, it's become a hobby of mine over the weekends. Could go to very archaic-looking household shops. Some of them are still around, some filled with dusty old shelves, and look for hidden gems and forgotten gems of small household products. And these products might look simple at the onset, but they're really wonderfully and beautifully designed. And in fact, if you look at the framework here, I might go further to say that none of these products that's been presented in the National Gallery, because they're really old and design as a profession maybe has not been established at that time, 50 years ago, none of these products were probably designed by a designer. These products were designed by a mix of different factors and stakeholders coming together. So, for example, the producers producing these products might really want to maximize, their profits. They find the most cost-efficient way to produce these products, use the least number of materials, and at the same time, the distributors or the shopkeepers who want to maximize business profitability, right? So their selling price must be considerably higher than the manufacturing or the distributor's price. At the same time, all these things need to fulfill, the desire of the consumers for very quality product that at least works fairly well. So with that, you might say that these products are designed by non-designers, honed by circumstances and the context where it's made in and made from and made for. But at the same time, when all these things come together and optimize the product, using these circumstances, of course, the result can be really bad, right? Yeah, but sometimes when the stars are aligned, some products can be really, really thoughtfully worked out as well. And I really just want to talk about a few of them today. So I will just be picking out some of the points of each product for you to think about as well. So in this case, the first product I want to show is the mat. And the mat here, if you notice, and if you look closely, you can see the very tiny pink dots in the mat, right? They're scattered very neatly all over. So these pink dots are actually, in fact, raffia string, pink typical raffia string that is used to tie the fabric together to weave a floor mat. And these fabric that they use, probably cotton offcuts from a waste material, from a fabric production, and coming together with the raffia string woven in such a manner to form a rug. And in fact, by weaving in this way, it forms a lot of bumps, right? And it does help, create texture for the rubbing of one's feet when drying. Next is the frosted plastered cup. You might find this very familiar, right? You might have used this in your school canteen, when you were really young. And the frosted feature in this cup for me is really special in a few ways. Number one, of course, the frosted texture here, makes the plastic cup gives a non-slip texture, so that you can hold it more easily than one which is really smooth. But at the same time, it actually makes the cup a lot less susceptible to scratches. And even if you scratch it, it kind of hides the scratches. So it gives the cup a lot more longevity, I might think, compared to a clear plastic cup, which is very hard to maintain. And last but not least, having this frosted texture on the cup, it actually looks a little bit like condensation, when you put cold water in a drink, and it gives the impression, that the drink inside is cold. And for me, that's a really interesting point. The next product I like to share is the Tong. And of course, you can find many tongs in different household goods, and but this particular one for me is really, really well designed in this aspect. As you can see, this tong does not use a spring system as most modern tongs found in the marketplace. So the hinge here depends entirely on the flexibility of the metal part that you see at the hinge, right? Using the material property as a spring instead of having spring systems to fulfill the clasping motion. Yeah. At the same time, if you notice, the middle of the tong right here, you have the edge folded, and also there's an indentation, a line of indentation here. So essentially, these details actually stiffen the part of the handle where you hold it and you apply pressure. And last but not least, at the end of the tong, you get that scallop tip, that helps you hold food. But in this case, when it's done really, well, it looks really beautiful at the same time. The next product here is the electric shaver, and which some of you might recognize. This was the first electric shaver I had when I needed to shave, and this shaver is still in production. It's really cheap, because it's made out of very simple, straightforward plastic molding techniques. Yeah, but at the same time, the shape of this shaver is really interesting. It separates clearly the handle from the shaving element, and if you imagine holding it, switching it on with your fingers and using it, it actually is very comfortable to use, and almost a very elegant way, to use a shaver, which is quite commonly, quite a industrial looking product. Next is a sauce dispenser. I'm not sure if you've seen this before in some of the really old shops, but in this case, this sauce dispenser is made of just a single material. Unlike most sauce dispensers you see nowadays, where it's made of different materials, probably some plastic, with a silicone lining. But in this case, the body, the base, the handle, the spout is all made of a single clear plastic material that's molded in one go. And the interface between the cap and the mouth is roughened here for a friction fit, a very simple fit. And more importantly for me, when it's done this way, not only does it save on resources, and well, when the whole thing is clear, when it holds a colored sauce, it almost looks like the sauce is being suspended inside this clear receptacle, and it really looks beautiful with a colored sauce inside. The next one is a measuring jug, and this measuring jug looks pretty normal, and it is made out of a rather thick gauge of steel. But more importantly, it has a wider mouth and a spout to clearly indicate where the liquid is going to come out. In this case, the volume readings usually is printed, but the volume readings in this case is embossed on the inside of the measuring jug, and you can see it quite clearly. At the same time, it doesn't require an extra step to put the readings that's often printed on typical measuring jugs. But if you notice here, there's a really interesting thing about this jug. It's the inverse handle. So in this case, the handle was not attached wrongly to the jug, but was intentionally inversed in the shape, so that when you inverse the handle like that, it actually makes it a little bit more, gives you a little bit more control when you handle it, especially when the jug is heavy or when it's quite full. you can pour it and you can use it with a little bit more control. So I thought that was a very, very thoughtful feature. The next product I'd like to show is the wave cutter. Some of you might not know what this is for. Essentially, the wave cutter is used to cut pastry and cakes. For example, like agar-agar, so that you get a wavy shape at the edge of the agar-agar when you cut it. And in this case, it's as simple as it can get. And essentially, this wave cutter is made out of single material, single thickness. It's folded sheet pattern, for the cutting edge, and it's slot directly into a folded profile that is made of the same thickness and the same material. So that holds it like a clamp. For me, it's very, very intelligently designed and produced, right? Although it looks really, really simple. The next product I'd like to share is the mug with the saucer lid. These mugs are made of melamine, and we see a lot of melamine wares in coffee shops that's being used because melamine is a very cheap material, but at the same time, very durable plastic, right? But at the same time, for me, this mug is unique because of the use of the saucer. So the saucer, as you can see here, has two different circumferences. So the top of the saucer, acts as a saucer when you place the cup on it. But when you flip it over and you cover the cup, it sits nicely over the cup as a lid as well. And I thought that was quite thoughtful. At the same time, it just happened that these colors that's being produced really look beautiful when it comes together. The next thing is a deep fried thermometer. You might not have seen this before. I would consider this more of an antique piece because nowadays, thermometers are made with steel probes, right? And you can insert them in different types of temperatures and also different types of food material. But in this case, this deep fried thermometer was probably made 20, 30 years ago where we don't have probe thermometers. And to be able to insert the thermometer directly into hot oil, to measure the temperature of hot oil for deep frying, this was quite smartly done, whereby existing thermometer is essentially placed in a glass enclosure, as you can see in the picture. So it's a glass tube thermometer within another glass tube. And by doing that, it's a lot safer and less risky, when you put it in oil with very, very high temperature. And if it breaks inside, at least it won't contaminate the food. But at the same time, I thought it's interesting, that the graphical representation of readings are very clear and precise. At the same time, you must be wondering, why is there this red knot on the clip of the thermometer? And for me, I was wondering actually why is it there for? Is it just for decoration? It couldn't be. And I postulate that is there to serve as a warning, to serve as a sign. Because when you insert the thermometer into a pot of hot oil, it serves as an indicator to show you that there's something there, popping up visually, so that you, for example, you wouldn't cover the cover of the pot, accidentally and breaking the thermometer. So I thought that was really smart as well, at least for times as such. And last but not least, the last item for me, and a really beautiful item, simple as well, is the net scrub. This is essentially a sponge, a scrub that you can use to wash dishes. It's made out of fishing net. So fishing net, as we know, is extremely strong and extremely durable. But by scrunching them together in this shape and tying them together, it forms many interlocking holes, so it can hold soap very well. At the same time, it can be used to scrub grime pretty well as well. And more importantly, unlike some of the more resilient sponges, it will not scratch utensils or crockery, for example, that's made of clear plastic or glass. So it's really gentle on utensils, but at the same time, it can take off the grime pretty well. And I'm not sure if you heard this before, from your grandparents. My grandma told me once that one of the best ways to clean and most efficient ways to clean dishes is to use a cloth instead of a sponge, because with a cloth is a very big surface area and you can wipe and clean with soap and covering the dishes that you're washing, and sometimes you can wash your dishes in half the time compared to using a sponge. So in this case, using a net scrub, you actually get a much bigger surface area, and thus it's probably more efficient to use this to clean your dishes as well. So with that, I end my presentation, and I hope if you have time to visit the exhibition at Future Past at the National Vending Gallery at the National Design Center, and we have 14 more objects there for you to think about and for you to consider. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans, for the insightful sharing as well. So now we'll be moving on to the Q&A segment. So we actually have a question for Dr. Christian. And the question is, what are some ways we can increase the semantic factor of our design?
Thank you very much for this question, because it's absolutely crucial for me. I would like to say that the inspiration of the designer is not coming especially from design. The designer should observe their environment. If you look at the top masterpiece since now more than 50 years, some source of inspiration come from nature, come from arts, come from food. And a designer is a student in design should be one person who like food, who like to drink, who like to meet people, who like to observe, who go to museum, and who like dance. Dance, for instance, could be also a source of inspiration. Music should be a source of inspiration. And of course, we can get some inspiration from famous designer, of course. But for me, the purest inspiration for a designer is when should come from everywhere in our everyday life. And sometimes ugly object could be source of inspiration and could be twisted in such a way that the scale can change. Just to finish this presentation, when I was doing my study in Finland, I was studying at the University of Art Art and Design in Helsinki. And one of the top designers at this time was Stefan Lindfors. Stefan Lindfors is a bit older than me, and he was fascinated by the insect. So his source of inspiration was the insect. And so from the scale of a small microscopic insect, he could bring some character and make a table or a chair from those specific articulation. So I would like to conclude that from absolutely everywhere, from absolutely any scale, you can be inspired and bring back to your own design.
Thank you for the answer. And also, because we're running a bit late, we'll try to do one more question. Yeah, so it'll be directed to both the speakers. So the question would be, at what point do you know that you have overanalyzed or over-designed something, especially when it comes to everyday items which are meant to be mass-produced at relatively low cost?
I think Hans can start, maybe. Please.
That's a really good question, actually. I guess that's a question that a designer will ask at every step of the process, especially when you're designing a product that is supposed to be economically produced and sold at a relatively low cost. And so I think in this case, if we are talking about optimization, right, it's a matter of give and take. So you can't usually overanalyze something, but once you have come up with the product, sometimes uh, uh, you might have because you wanted to achieve a certain low cost, for example, you might have given up on some a different part of the, and if we use the analysis that Christian proposed, you might have given up a little bit on usability, for example. You might have made a compromise on a different aspect of the product. So for me, although optimization, you cannot over optimize something, because if you over optimize something, it's still optimized, right? It's just very, very optimized. But at the same time, with limited materials, limited products, limited technology, and while we work with what we have, it's always about coming up with that balance, of optimization, where you consider all the different parts together, so that contextually your product works, for your end user.
I would like to add that to design a very simple and inexpensive product is one of the most difficult challenge for a designer. It's almost, if I want to find some poetic analogy, to write a long letter or to write a poem and to write a song, and we try to throw away the not necessary word to keep only the essence. And we never overanalyze. I would like to say that this syntactic, pragmatic, and semantic analysis allowed us to look at the product from three different angles, which is very practical, very important for us. But we can spend a lot of time, and more we observe and we highlight some problem, more we can find some solution. But regarding if we look at the top masterpiece again, you observe that there is nothing unnecessary. Everything is there, and all. I'm so happy that Hans highlight all those projects, those objects presented in the exhibition. It reminds me also after the Second War in Japan, some people who are not designers have been using the motor of the old car to make some spoon. And there is one exhibition of the Alexander von Weizsäck from the Vitra Design Museum showing all those beautiful humble objects using the minimum materials, but we did not sacrifice the pragmatic dimension. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, speakers, for the answers. And yeah, once again, we're so sorry that we're running a bit late. For the rest of the Q&A questions that are unanswered, we'll try to answer them, and we'll be sending a concluding email at the end in a few days' time. So do look out for that. So yes, we'll also like to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and we hope that you have gained some interesting insights. Should you wish to revisit any presentation, the recording of our session will be made available online on Design Singapore's YouTube channel. You may also visit the National Design Centre to experience the National Vending Gallery for yourself. National Vending Gallery is an unmanned gallery that introduces and vends temporary collections that reveal the multifold influence of design gripping our lives. Our second topic, Future Past, exhibits enlightening household artifacts that are sensible and beautiful at the same time. Though having clearly been around for a long time, these artifacts provide an uncanny perspective to the future of democratic design. The topic will be ending on 7th February, so do drop by before then. What is Design is also holding an event in conjunction with National Vending Gallery. We are having an open call for submissions of images from people with everyday items that they feel like have been very well designed. 3 lucky winners will be chosen to receive a nail kit, plastic scoop, and a wire scrub respectively. All of these are part of the 24 selected items on display at the National Vending Gallery. So do scan the QR code or submit your photos to the What is Design Instagram page. Lastly, we really appreciate it if you could complete a simple survey for the workshop to help us improve our future programs. You can do so by scanning the leftmost QR code or by accessing the link that we'll be posting into the Zoom chat right now. And if you would like to find out more about the various upcoming programs at the National Design Centre, do scan the QR code that you see in the middle. Finally, as much as we cannot see everyone in this virtual space, the sharing, the lively discussion, and the energy is real. Thank you for sharing your evening with us. It has been a pleasure hosting this webinar. With this, keep well, stay safe, and have a very pleasant evening. Goodbye.